Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking the code on one of cybersecurity's oldest and, most persistent threats, the brute force attack. We're going to dig into how it works, why it usually fails in a big way, and, more importantly, those times when it becomes scarily effective. You've probably wondered this yourself, right? Especially when you're forced to create another one of those super complicated passwords. So, how hard is it really for someone to guess it? Are we talking a few minutes of work, or are we talking longer than a human lifetime? Let's find out. So, at its heart, a brute force attack is basically the digital version of taking a giant keychain with a billion keys and trying every single one until the lock clicks open. Yeah, it's not fancy, it's not elegant at all, but man, is it methodical. It's just guess. Okay, so here's what we've got on tap. First, we'll cover the basics, trying every single key. Then, we'll get into the crazy numbers that make this seem impossible. After that, we'll look at where things can go wrong, the constant back and forth of attacks and counterattacks, and we'll finish up with a look at a genuinely unbreakable code. All right, Section 1, trying every single key. Let's dive right into the basic concept here. You gotta know how it works before you can figure out how to stop it, right? The idea itself is dead simple. An attacker literally just calculates and tries every possible combination that could be a password. Think about a 4-digit PIN. That's just trying 0000, 001, 002, all the way up to 9999. Easy enough. But, and this is the key, the moment you add another character, or you start mixing in letters and symbols, the number of combinations just explodes. It grows exponentially, and the attacker's job gets a whole lot harder really fast.
Which brings us to our next section, an impossible numbers game. So what happens when we're not talking about a simple password, but about modern, heavy-duty encryption? Well, this is where the numbers get absolutely insane.
Okay, just look at this. We're talking about a standard 128-bit encryption key. The number of possible combinations is 2 to the power of 128. That gives you, well, it gives you a number with 39 digits. It's not a big number, it's an astronomical one. It's like a vast, dark ocean of possibilities that an attacker would have to swim through. And to really wrap your head around that, forget about computing power for a second. Let's talk about pure physics. The actual laws of physics get in the way here. Just to cycle through all of those 128-bit keys would take about 10 to the 18 joules of energy. That's like running 30 gigawatts of power for a whole year. It's just not physically possible with the energy we have on this planet. And if you think that's wild, let's level up to 256-bit encryption. For one of the world's fastest supercomputers to crack that, we're talking 3.67 times 10 to the 55 years. I mean, that's a number so big, the age of the universe is a rounding error next to it. That is what we mean by computationally secure. It's not that it's theoretically impossible, it's just practically impossible. So the bottom line here is pretty clear, right? When you're up against properly implemented, strong encryption, a brute force attack is more than just a bad idea. It bumps right up against the fundamental laws of physics. The universe itself is basically saying, nope, not gonna happen.
Okay, that brings us to the big question. If this stuff is so unbreakable, why are we always hearing about breaches? This is our next section, finding the cracks. Because this is where the perfect clean world of theory crashes head-on into messy, complicated reality.
And here's the deal. In theory, breaking strong encryption needs impossible amounts of time and energy. But in reality, attackers are smart. They don't go after the unbreakable lock. They go after weak passwords, the flimsy key we choose. Or they look for flaws in how the lock was installed. The problem is rarely the math, it's almost always human error. And oh man, history is just littered with examples of this. Look at Netscape back in '95, or a big flaw in Debian's OpenSSL in 2008, even the famous Enigma code from World War II. These systems weren't cracked because the core encryption was bad. No, they were cracked because the random keys they generated weren't actually random. They had predictable patterns. And if an attacker can predict your pattern, that giant, unbeatable haystack you were hiding in suddenly shrinks to a tiny, very searchable pile of hay. Plus, you have to remember today's attackers aren't using some old laptop in a basement. They're using serious hardware. Modern graphics cards, the ones for high-end gaming, turns out they are perfect for the kind of math needed to guess passwords over and over again. They can test billions, with a B, of weak passwords every single second. This makes short, simple passwords total sitting ducks. And just how powerful are we talking? Well, get a load of this. A test from 2022 showed that a setup with just 8 top-of-the-line RTX 4090 GPUs could run through all 200 billion combinations for an 8-character password in 48 minutes, less than an hour. That's why you hear us harping on password length and complexity all the time. 8 characters just doesn't cut it anymore, not even close.
So that brings us to the next part of our story: attacks and counterattacks. This is a constant game of cat and mouse. The hackers get clever, so the defenders have to get even cleverer. Let's take a look at the playbook.
Check this out. It's a really slick variation called a reverse brute force attack. Instead of taking one username and hammering it with a million different passwords, the attacker does the opposite. They take one super common password, like password 123, and they try it against thousands of different usernames. This is often called password spraying, and the whole point is to fly under the radar and not trigger any alarms by locking out a single account.
So how do we stop this stuff? Well, this is where the system-level defenses kick in. You've seen all these: limiting login attempts, forcing you to wait a few seconds between tries, making you prove you're not a robot with a CAPTCHA. The whole point is to make automated attacks painfully slow and basically useless. And of course, the absolute king of defenses is multi-factor authentication, or MFA. That pretty much stops these attacks dead in their tracks.
Okay, let's wrap this all up with a final, really fascinating idea. We've talked about codes that are practically unbreakable. But what if there was a code that was mathematically proven to be unbreakable? I'm talking truly, perfectly, 100% unbreakable.
Well, it exists. It's called the one-time pad, and it is pretty much the holy grail of cryptography. The rules are simple, but they are absolutely ironclad. 1, the key has to be truly random. 2, the key has to be just as long as the message itself. And 3, you can only use the key one time, ever. You follow those rules and you have perfect, unbreakable encryption.
And here's the beautiful reason why. If you try to brute force a one-time pad, you don't just get the real message. You get every possible message of that same length. So you decrypt attack at dawn, sure. But you'd also decrypt retreat at noon, and order a pizza, and happy birthday. You'd have zero way of knowing which one was the actual message. It's mathematically perfect ambiguity. In all of history, it's only ever been broken when someone made a mistake and, say, reused a key.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending question, doesn't it? If we have a system for perfect, unbreakable security, why on earth is it so rare? Why don't we use it for everything? Well, it all comes down to one word: practicality. Can you imagine having to securely share a brand new random key the size of a novel with your bank every single time you wanted to check your balance? It's not workable for everyday life. And that really is the eternal tug-of-war in security, the constant trade-off between what's perfectly safe and what's actually usable.